Cool, so this week, eagerly anticipated is indeed the Dragon's Eye. We've been kind of working up to this, haven't we? And then from next week we'll move on to other things. And I think I've decided in the end we're going to do 3 different storybook covers where we could then write a short story with that as our front cover. Okay, so for the Dragon's Eye, you don't need to do this, but I've got my very quick concept sketch, so I've got a bit of an idea of the process we're going to go through. Otherwise, we'll need that medium-sized brush, whatever you've got really, pot of water, that bit of card, and I'm going to go slightly larger this time myself, just to give a bit more room for embellishments. This week, we could do with a little bit of sponge, because we need to get a background colour on there. So I've just used a portion of a scourer, and yeah, we've got that sponge side and the scouring side, which we might use as well. We'll have a think about that. A pencil for doing some of the outlines, a bit of paper for our practice brush strokes, and then paints wise I've got 2 separate palettes, and you can just use the Tupperware lid if you need to. So the first palette has just yellow and red on it, and we're going to be using that for our base coat with the sponge, so we need that in a separate place really. And then our second palette, which will be for the detail, and sorry this is a bit messy, this is the life of an artist for you. We've got brown, we've got black, we've again got some yellow and red, and then a little bit of blue, which will be for that highlight again, and some white, which will be for the highlights, and plus a little bit of lightening of certain areas. Okay, that's it. Let's give this a go. Okay, so first things first, we're going to have a go at now getting a different background colour onto our cardboard to begin with, which will be the colour of the dragon. So in this case, we're going to go with some red and some yellow, and we're going to have a go at using the sponge. Right, so I'm going to dip it into the red and then a bit into the yellow. And don't worry about mixing them together at the moment. Let's just dab across a little bit and then dab onto our bit of card. And I think probably even just with a little bit of paint we can move that round quite a bit. We can probably use that quite far and wide. Okay, that's quite reddish, so I might mix it up a bit with getting a bit of yellow, dabbing that up into my corners. You guys might want to have a bit of newspaper down on the table before, probably should have said that. Okay, yeah, so try and mix it up a bit. If you can see that it's looking a little bit just sort of dominated by red, just put the sponge down into a bit of that yellow, mix that in. So I'm going to just bring that down so I can get up into the corner. Okay. Right. It's looking pretty good. You know, I think maybe we won't use the scour end. I had it in my head that we might use it to sort of scour away a bit, but I think there's enough texture here that we can probably just leave it as it is. And one of the things I'd say in art is, wherever possible, simplify. That's certainly my approach to mural painting. Wherever you can, simplify the process. Simplify your life, make things easier. So I think actually there's enough texture there. So yeah, okay, like I say, if you can see that you've got too much red in certain places, bring in a bit of yellow, and same in reverse. If you can see that there's a bit too much yellow, bring in a bit of red. Okay, we're going to need to leave that for probably 3-4 minutes to dry. So yeah, have a cup. Yeah, probably needed to give that a little while just to dry fully, but it does need to be dry. Okay. We're going to do a little bit in pencil now. We're going to start with the line that the eye will be along. We'll go from bottom left up to top right. And for now, just draw a bit of a line with your pencil. Could be along a ruler or just anything else straight that you can find. Okay, that will do. Okay, in the middle of that line, so right smack bang in the middle of our bit of card, as much as you can, we're going to draw that circle of the eye again. So find something medium-sized that's circular, be it a mug or a cup or a glass or something like that, or a jar, as in this case. Okay, right. So from there, on the bottom left, we want to draw a triangle coming down towards our line. So out from the circle and down towards the line. We're then going to do the same thing, draw a triangle out from the top right, out towards the line. So we've now got that sort of diagonal line of the eye. Okay, we're going to do a few more lines around it now just as guidance, but that's all we'll do with the pencil because I think it's good to move on to the brush as soon as you can. Okay, so our next guiding line, come down your diagonal line by perhaps an inch or so, let's say there, and we're going to do a curving line following the line of the top of the eye as it is so far, right up over the top and right to the back of our eye. And if it gets a little bit wider as you get towards the back, that's no bad thing. I think that would look good. Okay, we're going to do the same thing. We'll start from the same point and we're going to come underneath the eye and follow that same curve. So following the same distance from that curve of the eye itself that we've already got and up to the very back. Okay, so now underneath we're going to do an additional curved line. Maybe slightly thinner, but kind of as you please. What I've loved about your artwork so far is that each one is a little bit different, and that's what I love to see, is that each person's putting their individuality into this. Okay, on the top we're now going to do something slightly different. So from around here, so if you come up from that central point by about 2-3 inches, we want to then come sort of straight out down to that edge of our bit of card. Okay, and then above that, starting maybe an inch or an inch and a half above there, we're going to bring a new line up over the top, and this will be the very deep brow of the dragon. So that will go up to maybe there. You're basically just sort of drawing a line up across the corner, this top left corner, and then we don't need to do anything up at the top right. Okay, I think as our final guiding line, we'll just do a line coming straight from, if you can picture where the exact top of your circle is, we're going to find that. So often I'll draw a little guiding dot and I'll have a look and I'll think whether that's right or not. That looks about right. And we're going to do just a straight line coming down through there. Okay, that's all the guiding lines that we need for now with the pencil. We're going to move on to the brush and we're going to start with a little bit of the brown paint to get some of our middle tones, our sort of a little bit of definition. Okay, right, so we've got our brush, we've got our water. I'm going to try and find a bit of that magic mix now between water and paint, where the paint moves smoothly over the surface of the card and doesn't blob or bunch and doesn't run either, so we need to wipe off the excess water. Okay, first things first, I need you to go along the outline of the eye that you've done, top and bottom, and we're going to fill in the sides, so outside of the inner circle, I'm going to fill in that lower and upper portions. Okay, and keep dipping into that paint and keep on wiping off the excess as well, so you've got good control. Okay, next for our line in the middle, we're going to be going over this with black at the end, but let's just start with brown because it gives us an idea. I want you to come out from the top, and then once you reach that sort of middle of the eye, you're going to curve back to your line. And the exact same on the other side, the sort of mirror image of that, curve back to the line. Once you've got that, you can block that in. Okay, that's good. Okay, next thing we're going to do, I think we're going to block in the whole of this front area with the brown, coming down to around there, because that's well in shadow, in deep shadow. Okay, so while we're at that front part, let's come up along that line over the eye that we drew. And you can make these lines fairly broad, actually. These don't need to be too precise. We're going to be doing more precise lines later on. Once you reach the back, follow your diagonal line up towards that top corner. Okay, we'll do the same up over this line at the front, just to make sure that's clearly defined. Basically, we're going over the pencil lines that we'd done just before, but with some thicker paint lines. So let's go over this one here, curve that up towards the eye, and this one here, curve that up towards the back, the one nearest under the eye, and then no prizes for guessing the one underneath that. Okay, we might just need to give all of this a bit of a moment to dry. Just give it 2 secs. Okay, right, we're now going to add some of the scale details, and then afterwards we'll be adding the highlights and some deeper shadows with the black. But for now, let's stick with the brown. Okay, let's start with this biggest brow up over the eye. So leave that top left corner for now. We're going to come to that in just a sec. So into that biggest brow, and still with the brush, we want to do basically some arrows pointing up along the brow. So that can be our first. Once you've got your first, it acts as a good guide for the angle of the next. So yeah, our diagonal lines will come approximately into the middle of that band, and then back in the opposite direction. So we're going approximately to the middle and back. Okay, get a bit more water. It's getting a bit sticky, so add a bit more water. Right, I now need to start imagining where the middle would be, and I think actually probably the top of my card is roughly the middle. So if for you still have more of that line going up, keep those arrows coming down from the top into the middle and back. But actually for me, I think I'm now working at this kind of angle. So I'll just complete those as I go back and do a last one. There, that should do it. Okay, right. We're now going to do the same thing in this, the brow nearer the eye, which maybe is the lid itself, I'm not sure. So again, starting from that lowest point, we'll do that little arrow. And these, of course, are going to be smaller, and therefore maybe a bit closer together than the ones up over the top. I think these scales would be slightly finer. It's always worth taking your time with the first few, and then once you're confident, you can speed up a bit. So you can see that these kind of radiate up along. The angles are changing slightly, so that at all times I've got that diagonal coming from the top along into the middle and then back on itself. Okay. Right, we're going to do the same thing on these two underneath. Same rules apply. So arrow back and along. I know you guys will have different brushes to me, and I know that perhaps you'll have brushes that are a bit trickier to use, so kudos to you for having a go, whatever your brush may be like. But if you're finding your brush isn't doing quite what you want it to do, just keep turning it around, because you never quite know. You might just find that perfect angle of brush, of using the brush to get the brush strokes that you want. And a top tip for getting more precise lines is simply just to press more lightly. Okay, and do the same along this last fold under the eye. all the way along. Right, I need a bit more paint. And all the way back up to the top. Okay, let's give that 2 seconds. Right, okay, we're now going to do a different kind of scale in the remaining zones that we haven't yet put our scale outlines into. Okay, so keep with the brown for now, because I think it stands out against the red and yellow to about the right amount for now. And then we'll get more definition in there at the end. Okay, so let's come to this top left corner. What I want you to do, as best you can, is do little circles that join up to one another. And I think they should be a range of sizes. So some, I'd say that's medium, some bigger, say that's about right for a big one, and then some really small. I think I need more water because the brush isn't moving smoothly enough. Okay, so if you can see that you've got too many of one size, do a few at a different size. So I'd say maybe I've got too many medium ones for now, so I'm going to switch. Let's do another big one there. And maybe another really small one there. A medium-sized one will fit there. Okay, this is nearly enough. Right, that should do it. And if you don't come all the way up to the top, that's all right. Okay, we're going to do the same. Down bottom, well, right primarily, but let's start here. So I'll start with a couple of smaller ones. So with the previous eyes, I have been shown some examples where people have used other mediums, like pencil or pencil crayon, and I think that's really cool. Obviously it's a slightly different process, so it's impressive if you can project from what I've done to doing it with a different medium. I think that's pretty tricky, because paint has its own very particular process. I think I need a bigger one there. These don't need, as you can see, to be precise circles at all. In fact, if there are a range of different I don't know, sort of outlines, then actually that looks good. If some of them are slightly more hexagonal, great. If a few are more square, fantastic. So yeah, a range is good. And I think that's often the case with art, that if you do a range of different textures and approaches, things often look a bit better than them being too uniform, which often doesn't look as realistic as being a little bit more varied and random. But I think as we get around the back of the eye, I think I can increase the size of these scales a little bit more. Still doing a few small ones to keep it interesting, but I think we can get a few bigger ones in there now as well. I should say at this point that I've been massively impressed with all the examples that I've been sent so far of your animal's eyes. Just, yeah, blown away by what you've been doing. So that's really, really cool. Please do keep them coming. This is going to be our last animal's eye for now. I think maybe later in the year, if we're still doing these sessions, maybe we'll come back to it. And there's so many more that we can do, and eyes are amazingly distinctive. You can pretty much look at the eye of something and have a pretty good idea of what animal, or in this case creature, it is. But yeah, we're going to move on to something different next week, and just keep it interesting. Okay, I think that's it for the brown paint. Let's leave that there. Cool, okay. Going well. We now need to have a think about where our deepest and darkest tones and shadows are within this dragon's eye. So I think first of all, probably we need to go over some of our crease lines again. So I'm just going to go up over the top there. I'm going to do a thicker line because this really is a deep, dark, furrowed area underneath that bigger brow. You might be able to see I need a little bit more water there. Beginning to drag a bit. Okay, and up. And all the way over, I think, to the back there. Okay, we'll do the same along that line. A little bit of a cut there, but we don't need to go over all of our brown. Right, now tracing up over the top of the eye itself. And if this is a fairly thick line, that's absolutely fine. That works well, I think. And to the back. And again, I'll do that underneath, but actually on the underneath, be a bit thinner because of course there's a bit less of a shadow there if the light is coming from the top, and I often imagine, for myself at least, the light coming from top right. That just gives me a clear direction of the light. Then there'll be less shadow there than there would at the top of the eye. Okay, we're going to come around the edges of our eye. Quite a thin line, but just see how you go. And then this one too. Neaten up that. Right, we now need to do the whole of that pupil again. It's quite nice to have the brown as guidance before we commit with the black. Okay, that will do for that. Okay, and the same again underneath along these main furrowed lines. But it doesn't need to be continuous. As you can see, I'm just mixing it up a bit here. So I'm doing stretches, and then maybe it's a slightly broken line because maybe in some places the scales are allowing little bits of light further down through. Okay, right, I'm going to add just a little bit more of that black to a few places now. So I think you might want to let yours dry just for 2 secs, but I think I'm going to just add a little bit up around here to a few of these first little circles, and I'm actually going to slightly fill in some of the gaps with my black. Don't worry about filling in all the gaps because that would take you, I think, too long, but maybe just fill in a few of the gaps between your circles just to give a little bit more depth to a few, to show that a few of them are really deeply set. Okay, and maybe as we move away from the eye, we do a little bit less in between. Right, I reckon that's about right for up there. Sometimes less is more, sometimes more is more. Okay, I think we'll do the lower lines of these, but not the upper ones, because again, those will be more in shadow. Go up over like that. Okay, got to think, our light's coming from top right. Okay, both of these would be in shadow. Both of those would be that and that. And then probably here, it's just the lower parts in shadow. And then for down here, probably, yeah, mostly the lower parts. If our light's coming from top right. Okay, that's about right. And again for this, the lower ones, the lower creases within these scales will be more in shadow. Okay, right, front of the eye, we're going to do a few more of our circles, but with the black. Take care with this, and just as with anything with painting, if you see it's not going well, just have a little wee pause, walk away from it for a moment, let it dry, have a drink, and then come back and mix up your approach. So try with a bit less paint, or try with a little bit more water, or whatever you think you might need. But yeah, just the number one thing to avoid is getting stressed, because once you're stressed, your painting's just going to go from bad to worse. So I learned this the hard way myself long ago. Just walk away for a little while and come back when you're ready. There's no rush, especially in our present times. Okay, so same rule applies down and underneath here. I think we're going to go around a few of our circles and fill in a few of the gaps between them, but not all. So more especially, I think, closer to the eye, we'll fill in the gaps and outline the circles a little bit, because I think there's more shadow being cast just underneath this bit of the eye. Okay, more water. It's a never-ending task adding the water to the paint to make sure that it keeps moving fluidly. You see, I'm doing this quite quickly, but do take your time. You can keep pausing the video just as much as you need, really, to just have a look at the stages and catch up, or have your breaks. Breaks are good. Right, we're nearly there with the black now. Just going to do a little bit more outlining of some of these scales out along the back of the eye there. That doesn't need much, does it? Again, just a hint in places can be enough actually to give the right impression. Okay, let's leave that. Right, we're going to do just a very few highlights on the scales before we move in on the detail of the eye itself. So I've mixed up a bit of yellow and just a tiny bit of red, but actually we want to make sure that the tone that we're mixing up is lighter than anything that we currently have on our dragon's eye. So let's just give this a test, and if it's not right, it's not right, and I need to mix it up again. Okay, that's probably about right for there. Okay, so let's use what I've mixed here to do a few little highlights along these scales. So I'm just following the same line, but down from the darker lines that I've done. So down and to the left, giving a little highlight, because at that edge of the scale, there'll be a little bit more light hitting there. Okay, we'll do the same with these ones. Make sure not to go over your darker lines, all that work that you've already done. You can see that it's showing up a bit less there, because actually I've got lighter tones towards that back side of the eye, so I might need a lighter tone in order to get a highlight on top of those. It's all about contrast. You need to see whether what you're putting on is contrasting enough, and if it's not, you need a bit more white or you need a bit more yellow. Okay, right, so clearly for some of these now I need just a little bit more white, because that's the only way that I'm going to get a highlight to stand out on some of these scales. So just those few like that. When you're doing highlights, you want less water mixed in there, because if you mix in water, your highlight just won't show up. It needs to be fairly thick paint for the highlight to show up. Okay, I think just those few there, because I'm wanting to just stand out on the yellow that I've already done, and equally stand out on these ones back here. Do a bit lighter. Okay, now let's just do a few little highlights on these scales. So that's just a few little curves of that lighter colour on that top right hand side of your circles. Those ones are very much in the shadow, so they don't need little highlights, but I can do little highlights on all the ones where I think the light might be hitting them. The light coming from above. Okay, just need a little bit more there. Like I say with your brush, sometimes you need to sort of turn it right on its edge to get a fine enough line, or indeed if you've got a few brushes, this is where if you wanted to you could switch to a slightly finer brush, but I want to stick with this one because I want you to see that it can all be done with just the one thickness, the one medium thickness of brush. Okay, that's good for the highlights on the scales. I think let's leave that there, we don't want to overcomplicate it. Right, okay, let's move in on the eye itself, and we want to keep a similar sort of mix of, in this case, probably just the yellow and the white. So we're going to bring in texture and highlights to that eye. Okay, let's see how this goes. Right, there's a similar sort of approach to what we did with the tiger. So let's start with around the pupil. Not at the very top, because there isn't enough light hitting that. But we're going to come around the outside of our pupil, all the way to the bottom. Same on the other side, but not quite from the very top itself. And then the same on the outside of the iris. So come inside your dark line and start from around there. Again, not up over the very top. And curve around, all the way around on the inside and up to probably around there. Can you see I've got my diagonal line, so probably basically in line with that. All the way down. Okay, right. In the middle area between these two, so leaving the very top, we're going to leave about top sort of centimetre, centimetre and a half. We're going to do the same sort of thing as we did with the tiger's eye. For those of you who haven't watched it, this is going to be almost like spokes of the bike, and that they're going to radiate out around the pupil to the edge of the iris. But I think with the dragon, we're going to do them in a slightly more random, curved way. So they're not dead straight. It's almost a bit more like fire, yeah, sort of little wavy lines coming out, but leave some of your red showing through as well. Don't cover that up, so give some separation between your lines. It's almost like a veinage, I suppose. So on this side they come from the pupil and out towards the edge. Okay, that's probably about right, because yeah, we want to leave that top as it is. Okay, what I'm going to do at the very edge, I'm going to just bring a few little bits up from that very edge into my red. Join just a few of those lines, but that's probably about right. Okay, if it's drying too light and you want it to stand out more, just give it a moment to dry and then go over some of those lines. But like I say, sometimes less is more, and this is probably one of those occasions. And as you can see, I'm fussing, and that does happen. That does happen. Okay, cool. Okay, we're going to add just the last few details to the eye. I'd like to start with just a little bit more of the black. So just add a little bit more depth in a few places to really show where the shadows are. So let's come in front of the eye and bring just a little bit more of our black down into that area in front of the eye. Not going over the iris at all. Just drag it down a little, but not fully over the brown either. Let's probably leave it there. I might just slightly better outline the iris with the black, so that's a little bit more defined. Okay, same at the top really. Just bring a little bit more of that shadow down underneath that top brow. But leave enough of the brown, and then we'll just more clearly outline that edge of the iris as well. And lastly, just a tad more up over the top. I think it needs it, but really just a tad. Make sure you're not coming down too far into your iris. We just want to give it a little bit more depth up there. Okay, right, well let's leave that aspect there. Last few highlights now. I've mixed up a light blue, and we're going to do a few things with this light blue. First of all, we want to come along the lower edge of the whole eye, and that's where we've got basically a wateriness of the eye with the light catching that. So I'm just going to a little bit more white on there, just highlight the bits where I think the light will be catching the most, so coming up there a tiny bit. It's the tear ducts at the very front of the eye, so that's going to be quite bright there. Okay, maybe just a tad more white. Let's think where the light might really be catching, maybe at this front part here. Okay, let's leave that aspect there. Right, next area of highlight. So we're going to have our main top edge of the highlight coming from so left over the top of the pupil and over to the back there. So looping over the top, but a little way down from the very top of your eye. Okay, on the underneath of that, we want to do a little bit more of a sort of interesting line coming down from it. Maybe slightly into the top of the pupil there. I think over here, gonna bring it down. So keeping the crispness of that top edge, but beneath it, a slightly more wobbly line that probably again relates to the landscape that it's looking at and a bit of a skyline there. Okay, I think that will do there. Right, so we need to now get an even lighter blue but not quite bright white, and we want to come along the top edge of our highlight. That's where it's brightest. Okay, and now that final brightness, that final highlight, I want this to be a good size, so I'm going to try and pick up quite a decent amount of my white, and I think I'm going to bring my highlight down into here, so slightly down into the pupil, and just make that basically circular. Okay, I think we're there. I might just carry that line along the top and just make that just a tad, just a wee tad brighter. Okay. Okay, guys. Once you've finished your dragon, I'd love to see a photo of it. So please do send that to me on Facebook or Twitter or however you're in touch with me. And then if you feel up to it, maybe later in the week, perhaps at the weekend, I'd love to see you have a go at a different appearance of dragon. So it might be that your background colours are initially kind of blues and greens, or purples and pinks, or silver and gold. Try some different things there, and then maybe try some different scale patterns on top as well, and just see what works and even see what doesn't. Maybe try and get some more texture in the eye, and perhaps in the reflection at the top, perhaps there are other details in there. It could be the northern lights. Maybe there's the faint outline of another dragon. Certainly if you did the eye even bigger still, you could really go to town with what you put into that highlight up there. So yeah, I'd love to see what else you managed to come up with, and how you can sort of extrapolate and extend from what we've done here. Right, well, I hope you all have a fantastic week. Looking forward to seeing what you come up with, and I'll be working on another workshop for next week. Okay, bye for now.